Hello and welcome to the Spiritual Warrior Podcast, where we investigate what it means to live fearlessly on purpose. Each episode, we have a different guest who will share with us practical tools and real life examples that will inspire and inform us to live fearlessly on purpose. I am your host, Bob Cirino, and today joining me from Montreal, Canada is the one and the only dear friend of mine, Alfonso Arzapalo. Thanks so much for coming, Alfonso.
Thank you for inviting me, Bob. It's a pleasure to be here.
So Alfonso and I, we teach together at the Yoga Studies Institute. We've been doing that for the last 4 years, and we recently taught in Kyoto, Japan, and it was really, really sweet. And I got to learn a lot from him and came away with a lot of inspiration. And it felt appropriate to have him as the first guest on this podcast. So a little bit about Alfonso. He has taught over 1,000 hours. He's completed over 1,000 hours of professional training in yoga and meditation. He's taught more than 2,800 hours, which I think is a gross understatement. And he's been practicing for more than 24 years. So even though he was born in Guadalajara, Mexico, where he earned his Bachelor of Architecture, he then moved to Canada, where he got his Master of Fine Arts at the University of Quebec in Montreal. Somehow, in the meantime, becoming fluent in 6 languages along the way, and that's not including Sanskrit. Uh, when he's not teaching yoga and meditation, he is the chief design officer for Constellation EcoPods, which are beautiful and super cool. You should check them out. These are sustainable living units designed for off-grid living and low-impact environmental living. So really excited to dig in with you, Alfonso. It's so cool reading about your bio and looking at your different artwork. You know, it was hard to decide what actually ends up in your bio because you've done so many cool things. But I want to pick on Constellations a little bit. Can you tell me a little bit more about your inspiration behind why you're part of Constellations and what you're trying to do?
Yeah, totally. Thanks, Bob. Thanks for that lovely intro. And it's again an honor and a pleasure to be here sharing with all your audience. So thanks again. Well, Constellations, uh, it came from the realization. I mean, being an architect and being in the construction world and in the developing all kinds of housing and all kinds of different projects, you quickly realize that the construction business is in great part responsible for some of the carbon emissions and pollution that we have in the world. So at least 30% of all the carbon footprint that we put on in the world comes from construction. So when you realize that it's something that we need. I mean, we all need a roof over our heads, and we all need to have all these spaces that we need to do things and be sheltered from the elements. We realize that it's really something that we need and that we have to do. But then you start to think, how can this be done in a different way? How can this be done like in a better way? And it was very peculiar the moment we started because it was like we had this in the backs of our minds, me and some other guys, and I had like associates in this company, in this project, and we actually launched when it was the right with the pandemic, and when people were like thinking on wanting to get off of the city, out of the city, and be like outside and be more isolated and all. So it was a great excuse to see how we can get people to be in contact with nature and at the same time be able to have a space which they could easily and quickly install if they had a piece of land or if they had someone who had a piece of land. And then how can this um, house or space be ecologically responsible, eco-friendly, and it can reduce the actual footprint of the construction itself. And that's how it all started.
Why is it important, in your opinion, for people to be in contact with nature?
Well, I think for all of us that we in some way or another we've felt it directly or indirectly through art or through film or to whatever. We've felt that nature is inspiring, and we all have this awe feeling of nature reminds us that we're kind of small and there's something bigger than ourselves in a way. So when you're in nature, just realize how you are a part of something bigger than yourself. And I
Hmm.
believe that that is one of the main messages that consciously or unconsciously we feel when we are in the presence of something beautiful, something huge, something natural.
So your spiritual journey and your inquiry, did that come? Did that seed get planted before you started to get into architecture, or did that come later?
It came before. It came before. Actually, when you start realizing or going in introspection, I mean, once you found something like you're calling it something like a spiritual core or something that you relate to, then you start going back in your life to the moments where you felt the most connected, right? And when you go back in your life to those moments to say, okay, when was the start of my spiritual journey? So when did it all start, right? And then you go back tracing some moments where you like felt connected or part of something bigger than yourself. And then you realize that it's been going on for a while. And even when in childhood, you have these moments where you're like, oh, wow, there's a moment. And in my experience, most of those moments had to do with an intense or a moving connection with nature.
Hmm. Like,
So
what's an example of that? Do
yeah,
you have one that
I
comes to
remember in
mind?
my childhood. I don't know if it was the first time. I don't think so because I've been going on when I was a baby. But being in front of the ocean and seeing its vastness, and then just feeling the wind in your face and listening to the waves. And I remember I was pretty small. I was a kid, but I was just looking at the ocean. And I was just like trying to understand where all this vastness and magnificence was coming from and how it was manifesting, and then touching my feet and then the water. So I remember I felt a strong connection with the ocean in that moment and realizing how small I was in relation to that vastness that I was in front of me, right? And I
Mhm.
was pretty young in that at the time.
And for those of you who don't know, constellation houses are rather small. Like they're compact. They're not these big sprawling things. So it's interesting to identify that experience that you shared of feeling like small and a big thing and seeing how that comes through in your design work with constellations, how
That's
to be
interesting.
integrated as a small integrated thing into a bigger picture.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's an interesting reflection. Yeah, we work with what we call nanotexture. So
Nanotexture.
yes, so
Wow.
it's the architecture of small spaces to be very efficient with these spaces. So all the spaces are very well thought and designed, so you can have the minimal space that you have, and that's how it started, right? And we have some very ambitious goals and ambitious of how we want that to transform and to grow. But we decided to start small, and then from that smallness, frame the vastness of nature.
So, Alfonso, when I hear these words of like small, um, to some people that might feel disempowering. Oh, I'm so small. This thing is so big. How can I make a difference? How can I do something? So, but it sounds like this idea, like smallness in the bigness, is kind of a core idea for you. How does that strengthen you in upholding your heart throughout the day?
Yeah, well, it's a little bit of the being supported and belonging to. So if you feel if your experience of life wants to feel supported and wants to belong to something, then that which supports you or that's what you belong to has to be bigger than yourself. Otherwise, you're not gonna feel. supported, and you're gonna feel that belonging, right?
Mm.
So that's where the recognition of your size in relation to that which supports you, upholds you, and which you belong to. And that's where the smallness comes as a compliment to myself. Like I like being small because I can allow myself to belong and to be supported by this which is bigger than myself.
Beautiful. I love that. And I have had the fortune of doing some yoga practices with you, obviously. And one thing that I've really noticed in how you teach, especially with alignment, are these nano changes in our alignment can make a really big difference. So I was curious if you could, I don't know, go with me here on what are the nanotexture ideas within your being and your practices.
Nice. Great question. I'm totally not ready for that question, but it's like so good, so deep.
No, let's go.
No,
Let's
so it's
go.
great. It's like great because it's I'm a strong believer. You know, you have we have this with this phrase about um the phrase I think it says God is in the details. I mean, whatever you understand
Mm.
God is, right? But it's better said if we would say magic is in the details because I really believe that the details change everything, right? And if you're not if you don't agree with me, just imagine that you're holding a steering wheel on whatever your favorite vehicle is, right? And you just move that steering wheel just a fraction of an inch. And if you do that once, you're gonna end up in a whole other trajectory than what you were. And if you do that constantly, like just a fraction of an inch, your trajectory is gonna change dramatically. I mean, the more you travel in space and in time, the further the point of your arrival is going to be from where your initial trajectory is. So very small details make very big changes. So that's I'm gonna jump in. That works as much in yoga as in design of spaces. You know, so I really believe that's the thing about the little things, about the nano little detailed things that can really alter big outcomes.
So how does that come through into your everyday life? You know, you're a father, you're a co-founder, you have all these different roles. How does that nanotexture idea show up in your everyday life?
Nice. So it's about having all these little mental, physical, emotional gestures that you're putting forward throughout the day, right? So um, there's there's little things that you are doing constantly in your mind and with your breath that are keeping you in a space in which you're um, nourishing the favorable conditions to live and interact with life in a space in which you're proud of. And that can be very little things that we can go into afterwards, but that it's all you need to do to hold that space. Because sometimes we're tricked in thinking that we need to make drastical changes, that we need to
Mm.
make drastical practices in order for us to change. But I really believe that it's the little tiny, like again, coming back to the steering wheel, it's just little tiny little things that we're doing constantly that are going to really impact our lives in the most profound way.
So I'd like to dig into that a little bit. So you said three things. You said mental, physical, and emotional. So let's work through one example of each that you do in your life. So what's a mental example of a slight readjustment?
Yeah, great. Um, so there's, I mean, the well, I'm gonna have to jump into something else right here, but I guess it's
Okay,
gonna be nice. But
sure.
one of the toughest, hardest, most arduous works in the world is holding a steady thought of what reality is, um, when everything that you're perceiving is not exactly as it is. So
What do you
let
mean?
me go back again to that. So um, noticing that everything that I'm perceiving and everything that I'm seeing and everything that I'm looking at might not be in reality what I'm perceiving it to be. So
Okay.
to keep the mind knowing that what I'm actually perceiving with my senses is not absolute and it's not exactly what it is. And that mental exercise can be the most challenging exercise that one can have.
So what do you mean by that?
I mean that if we look at the sky at night and we see a star and we see the light of the star, we're looking at the light of the star, but we don't know if that star is still there. So our perception of reality is already faulty because we don't know exactly if what we're looking at is really there or how we're perceiving things are really there. So having the capacity to in your mind keep that in your mind, the little gesture of knowing that what you're perceiving might not be exactly what reality is like, gives you this space of little space of openness to know that that is a fact.
So, I mean, that's a that's a cool idea, especially in the conversation of like smallness and bigness, right? Like my small perspective may not be the actual image of the big reality. So, how does that help you? Like, for example, our listeners are really interested in what it means to live fearlessly on purpose. Um, so, how does that help you to live fearlessly on your purpose when things are challenging or if obstacles are coming up? How does that tiny micro adjustment, that nanotexture,
Yeah,
help you?
great. And then I'm gonna um, jump into the emotional and physical aspects of it too. So mentally, we've all fallen into the trap of looking at someone or looking at something and thinking that um, they are this way or that way, or they are not, uh, they might not be uh, as nice as, I mean, you meet someone and you make a judgment like this in 2 seconds. You're like, oh, this guy's like, and then reminding you that this perception that you have might not be reality. And if you, it, if I make a quantum leap here, and then you think of what your reality is, so your reality is made by your constant experiences and how you're relating to them, right? So if you keep that in mind, so every time you emit a judgment, every time that you're looking at something, some way, in a way that is not serving you to feel empowered, and
Mm.
you're realizing it in your mind, that's gonna keep you in that purpose of feeling empowered in your life. So you see something, you see someone do something, and then you immediately judge them in your mind. And then if in your mind is you have the little gesture of knowing that what you're perceiving might not match what the reality is, then your judgment will lose power immediately. So that you were doing, which is not empowering yourself, nor the experience, nor the other person,
Mm.
it's put into question through the perception of knowing that what you're looking at that right there and then might not match reality because your perception is faulty. So that's how that little detail in your mind, and that is the hardest, most arduous work, to constantly remind yourself that what you're perceiving might not be exactly what you're looking at. And then
Mm.
in the emotional side, the little gesture of it has to do with appreciation, which opens the door to gratitude, right? So every time that I'm in an experience, that I'm going out, that I'm doing something, that I'm meeting someone. If that little nano, going back to that little tiny gesture or detail of your emotion is to look something to appreciate, to find just a tiny little dot in that experience which you can appreciate, then your entire emotions will shift. And then you will be more in a propense to feel feelings of gratitude because you're appreciating something, right? So that's how the emotional part um, comes in. And then in the physical part, um, when you're feeling good in your body, so I mean, we've all felt it. Sometimes you wake up and you're like you feel like all your body's like all blocked and everything, and then the moment you start moving a little bit, or you start breathing, or whatever you do, or you start cleaning up the house, the moment the body starts to move, and then you start feeling that your body, there's like a flow in your body, you start feeling like that, then you're more propense to nourish the rest of the aspects, which are the emotional and the mental. So when your body is not feeling good and you feel all blocked, it will be harder to find that emotional little detail shift, and it will be even harder to have that mental little shift. So it starts with the physical little shift. So whatever you need to do, like shake it up, move your body, bend down, breathe, whatever you feel to do, so you feel that you're fully flowing inside your body. And that's where physical exercise or movement-based practices become really important, right?
Beautiful. Thanks for sharing that. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit here, Alfonso.
Yes, please.
And uh, when we say the word spiritual, what does that mean to you?
Great. So I'm gonna circle back to that smallness, right? Because for me, spirituality involves the recognition of a feeling or a sense or an experience or a belief that there is something greater than myself,
Hmm.
right? So it's something more than or a sensory experience of life. And that and, and that something greater is part of cosmic or universal nature, which is much bigger than ourselves, right? So for me, spirituality is that recognition.
Hmm. And so, what do you do to investigate that?
Yeah, so I'm constantly, in a certain way, I'm constantly reminding me of the fact, trying to live from the experience of this recognition. So when you're living in the recognition that there's something greater than yourself, and then in that somehow we are all, and everything that you're seeing is connected to that whole, which is greater than yourself. Then when you have that recognition and you're recognizing that everyone is connected to that part of that, and then that is permeating outside you, inside you, in between you, in everywhere that you're looking at, then you're more conscious of how your actions, your thoughts, and your words are contributing to that whole.
Interesting. When we were talking about, your perception of reality versus what is actual, like what's actually there, uh, that like the next logical step is to say that, well, it could be different. So how different could it be? And then you're like, well, it could be really different. Depending on, the disparity is potentially infinite between what I'm experiencing and what's actually there. It could be the same. I could be having a really accurate perception of this is exactly the way it is, but there's the opportunity for something different. And then if we were to consider all those different potentials of differences, that's what I'm feeling when you're saying there's this universal experience or there's something bigger. In one way, that humility of saying all of that infinite potential that I'm not perceiving, that's the thing that we all have in common between individuals. Would you agree with
Yeah,
that
that's
statement,
really that's pretty
Alfonso?
nice. That's pretty good. That's pretty yeah, that's a great way to articulate it. Great, Bob.
And then with your aspect on appreciation, it's so funny. It's like it seems so elementary. Just be grateful. You know what I mean? But when you make it a practice, especially if you do it with those micro nano adjustments all day, I mean, it is radically different. And appreciation, we can appreciate something as like, oh, I really like this. But another way to talk about appreciation is appreciating that something else could exist, right? So it's not like, oh, I like this appreciation. You can also appreciate the idea that there's something bigger. And so imagine that you were like so many of us when we're trying to do something big spiritually, it doesn't always necessarily line up with what society is expecting of us or, what our culture expects of us. So there's a lot of challenges that we have to overcome. And so then we can get kind of frustrated and we can have these negative emotions that are, as you said, disempowering. But if we're able to appreciate that differentiation of my reality versus, what could potentially be, and we just sit in that space of humility, then all of a sudden, at least for me and my body, as soon as I enter into that idea, I just relax, because it's like, I also really enjoy the sea. So there's like this feeling of like vibrant relaxation when you're like beholding the vastness of like infinity, essentially. And so then it takes away, I think, like the horsepower behind a lot of our negative emotions.
Totally, and that's the magic of appreciation. See, sometimes you say it's rather elementary, rather basic, but in reality, those are the things that are going to shift our lives. I mean, we're looking for this crazy different um, hidden gem somewhere in some place, in some other planet, in some other place, in some other's lawn. It's always we always think that what we're missing in our puzzle is somewhere hidden in something special and it's far away. And we gotta go find it, right? And we actually realized that these little things, like for example, appreciation, you just touch on something very powerful because you said that if you could appreciate that discrepancy between your perception and reality, and if you can appreciate that potential that's there, that might be different to what you're perceiving. But the magic is the appreciation itself. Because imagine that if you could appreciate someone criticizing you, because they're like putting on the energy and articulating all these words to be speaking about something that you did or something that you do or something that didn't do, and you can appreciate the fact that they're like criticizing you or something that, or you can appreciate someone being upset at you. If you can appreciate the fact that they're putting all their life force directed to you, if you can, so it's it's not even what you're appreciating. This is something I'm going to say something that I believe in my experience. But then there's all these perceptions, right? That that can resound in our audience or not. But for me, it's the appreciation itself. So it's not the object of the appreciation, but the appreciation itself is what brings you into what you described as a space of just feeling well or having this emotional charge in which you feel empowered in relation to what you're experiencing.
Mm.
So as you build your capacity to appreciate, then you're gonna have the capacity to appreciate more and more things, even the things which you had an aversion for at first, maybe, perhaps.
I'm feeling this feeling of, if we can appreciate not only our experience of that, but that somebody else's can also appreciate that. You define something spiritual as like this universal experience. That's the like appreciating that we are all in that experience, that same predicament or that
Yeah,
same scenario, uh, also takes the wind out of the sails of the negative feelings, because at the end of the day, we're all the same. And so often we're like, oh, that person's criticizing me and it's them, and we create this us versus them, this like separation between us. But if we realize that it's true that we have more in common than we have not in common, because the thing that we don't have in common is our exact perception, But the thing that we do have in common is the infinite potential of the variations of reality. And in that way, there's so much more that we have in common than we don't.
Totally, and the belonging to that reality. So yeah,
Oh, bringing it back. I love that.
yeah, totally,
Yeah, that's the thing that we belong to more than my side or your side.
totally. That's totally just so this belonging and then well, we all have this tendency for look for differences instead of similarities, and we all have this tendency to this. So it's related in a sense that if we are focusing on the difference and the differences that we have with each other and in our perceptions, then it's harder to come to a place of appreciation. And then if we are focusing on the similarities and the things that we share, it's so much easier to go into the mode of appreciation. So that can be for some of our audience, that can be a hint on how you can access um, appreciation and especially because the objective of this, remember, is living in an emotionally empowered space, which is that's going to be aligning with your purpose, right? You want to feel empowered to in your relationship that you're having with your experience.
Hmm. So one of the frameworks of spiritual warrior is that a spiritual warrior is engaged in four battlefields. The first is health, the second is wealth, third is relationships, and fourth is mind. Can you tell a story, Alfonso? You know, I'm putting you on the spot here, but is there a story that comes to mind when maybe you were feeling disempowered in one of those four battlefields and then you use this tool of appreciation to overcome the foe of disempowerment?
Oh, yeah, good. I mean, there's like not one time in my life that I've done it. It's just constantly happening. I mean, that's where the what do we say the fearlessness and courage of constantly being moving in the direction of your purpose or how you want to feel or how you want to relate to the experience is it's coming to being, right? So um, there's a lot of moments in my life. I can think of one right in the pandemic. I lost my relationship. I lost all my sources of income, which were dependent on me. I was working with the city of Montreal in architecture in the architecture department in that moment. So when the pandemic hits, the city closes down, and then so a lot of apparent challenges that were coming into me, right? And I remember myself um, sitting in my bed, looking at the floor, listening at the kids playing in the room, and then you I just lost my partner in what could be, if described in detail, one of a very strong pain point, especially as it happened and how it happened, and then all your income is gone, right? In that moment, and you're
Oh
just like
man.
that, right? So that's like I mean, in different scales, this happens to us all the time, right? This was like a biggie, right, over there. So you notice your mind immediately, and then because our mind will have a tendency to focus in either what's missing, what we don't have, or what we have, right? So if your mind goes to recognize everything that you don't have, everything that you've lost, everything that could be there, everything that you're not, right? Then all your emotions are going to be aligned with that. And it's going to be very, very, very unempowering emotions, which are going to come with all kinds of guilt and all these kinds of negative emotions. But in that moment, if you can recognize something that you do have, and recognizing something that you have immediately brings your appreciation towards that, right? So on the back of the house in the room, I can listen to my kids play. I have no kids. I'm sitting there. I'm breathing. I'm healthy. You know, I have health. I have life. I have this house. So the moment you start shifting your mind from what you don't have, what you've lost, to what you do have. And you always have more than what you don't have. Starting with your breath, going all the way around you. You have a roof. You just ate. You have this, you have that. We always have more than what we don't have. And the moment you can touch that, then you can shift back into what we were saying about the appreciation. And you start appreciating what you have. And then when you appreciate what you have, you expand. And then you start feeling gratitude to what you do have and what you're appreciating. And that's changing your emotions completely. And then suddenly, in this very, 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 very challenging situation, suddenly this little tiny mental shift has regained your empowerment of your experience. So everything outside is like this, but then you feel somehow you feel in a space of appreciation, you feel empowered and you feel grateful. Yeah,
Beautiful, beautiful. Uh, that's so interesting. When I come up with a mental image of like what a warrior is, it's someone who's making big movements. Like a conventional warrior, someone who's in a battle. They're making these big movements, but a theme in our conversation is how these tiny micro adjustments will help you to defeat that disempowering thing. And it's the accumulation and the amplification of those tiny little shifts.
totally. And actually, there's there's this book, The Art of War, right, by
Yeah,
Sun
yeah, yeah.
Tzu.
Yep.
And funny part about the book, by the way, it's a war book, but it's in the business section of libraries. And in in that book, you can get a sense of how small details, even in the battlefield, can make huge differences. Going back to the to our example of that little shift on your direction when you're driving, right? So same thing. If we're understanding um, the battle, if we're understanding the battle as an internal battle with ourselves and with our habits, our mind habits, emotional habits, and physical habits that disempower us, if we're understanding that the real battle is with ourselves and not with everything that is around us, and then if we have the courage and the fearlessness to recognize the tools and antidotes that we can apply to ourselves, which are going to make all the difference in the experience that we're going to have with our lives and how we can live from an empowered place, empowering our experiences from that courage and fearlessness of working with ourselves, through ourselves, to change ourselves. Then I believe we're really going into maybe what 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 your business is all about. We're becoming spiritual warriors. We're becoming fearless in keeping our purpose of recognizing our belonging in this bigger thing and recognizing that we all belong in this and how we can enrich our experience and the experience of others as we all belong together in this place, right?
Beautiful. Well, Alfonso, this has been extremely enriching. I've really enjoyed our conversation. Uh, Open mic for you before we go into our closing. Is there anything that you would like to just share generally with the audience?
Well, I want to thank you for your time, for your attention. I strongly believe that if you were to if I were to make a really short summary so you can like really get that nugget from our conversation and just put it in your pocket and use it as a tool or include it in your experience, it would be to be very attentive to what makes you feel empowered and how you can keep that relationship empowering. And we talked about appreciation, we talked about gratitude, and that's a very powerful tool that you can keep maybe. close to you and see how that can enrich your experiences. So think of the little things that you can keep in your pocket and your toolbox that you can use to feel empowered in your experience as you go through your days. Okay. And if you're interested in anything that I said, or you want to stay in touch, stay in contact, uh, you can stay in contact through Instagram. So I have this account which would be enlight.yourlife. So enlight.yourlife in Instagram. And then you can check us out in constellations.house. So constellations.house, you can see what we're doing relating to the housing projects and all that. And we're interested to hearing about your feedback and staying in touch.
Beautiful. Thank you, Alfonso. And please feast your eyes on the beautiful designs of those houses. They are gorgeous. When I come visit you, I hope to stay in one of those. That'd be awesome.
Great. Looking
Uh,
forward to having you around.
so, couple things I want to highlight as we close out this show is what I heard from Alfonso was really beautiful. Is the importance of feeling connected with nature and creating our spaces internally and externally in a way that's going to be responsible and in connection with something bigger, and that is sometimes not on necessarily a big scale, but on the smallest scale, on a nanotexture scale, where the magic is in the details, and a tiny little change can make a huge difference in our life over a lot of time and space. Um, so then we asked him, what were three tools, and he gave us three really, really great tools of our own nanotexture design or implementation. He gave us a physical one, which is if we're feeling blocked or stuck in our body, it's really as simple as just starting to move around. If you have some kind of, it could be as simple as cleaning your house, it could be as simple as just moving your body gently, or going into a more intentional movement practice. But just doing a small physical adjustment can open the gateway to the next two, which are emotional and mental. So emotionally, Alfonso said that we can always find a dot in any experience to appreciate, something tiny, tiny, tiny that we can appreciate in any experience. And just by focusing on that, we begin to transform our feelings. And we can do that not only by focusing on the differences between us, but more so to focus on the similarities between people if we're having an emotional challenge with people. And then lastly, and he said this was the hardest one, I'm going to probably agree with this one, mentally, the tool that we can be doing on a moment to moment basis is just recognizing that what we're seeing as our experience of reality isn't necessarily the true image of reality. And so when we're not feeling empowered, we can challenge our perception of the moment. And just by challenging the perception of the moment, the disempowering feeling loses its hold on us. And then we can move into appreciation.
Great.
So
So
that
so
that
so
was great.
nicely so nicely said and everything. Great, Bob. Thanks.
So thank you so much, Alfonso. Thank you, everybody, for joining in the show. You can follow me on Instagram at bob.cirino. If you're liking what you're seeing, there's a lot more there. And there's an online community of spiritual warriors who are trying to learn and implement all this stuff that we were just talking about today. So please join us in that community. It's a really beautiful group of folks who are committed to living fearlessly on purpose. So you can do that by going to spiritualwarrior.life/home. And you'll find a lot of great stuff. We study the classic texts of yoga and meditation. And then we have a lot of other really cool activities and courses to help you to implement and develop the habits that will help you live fearlessly on purpose. All right, guys,
Yes.
much love. Thank you so much, Alfonso.
Thank you, Bob.